Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Singapore Geospatial Festival, an event that brings the international geospatial community, public and private sector, as well as the community at large together for co-located activities promoting the use of location-based and mapping innovation. This event is organized by GeoWorks, Singapore Land Authority, Geospatial Industry Centre. Today, we are excited to have our panelists and moderator to share with us more on how geospatial technologies can go beyond smart city mapping and urban mobility. If you have any question during the webinar, please leave them in the Q&A chat box and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. Thank you, and without further ado, I will hand over to our moderator, Ms. Goh Seok Mei. Seok Mei, please.
Hi, thank you, Zulaira. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us in this exciting session on geospatial technology beyond mapping for smart cities and urban mobility. Why these two topics? Why smart cities? According to the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, 56% of our global population lives in cities today, and this will increase to 68% by 2030. 95% of this urban expansion will happen in developing countries, and main part of it is in Southeast Asia where we live. Cities occupy 3% of the Earth's land, but we account for 60 to 80% of the energy consumption and 70% of carbon emissions. And with rapid urbanization, we will see many challenges in cities. And these challenges range from managing pandemic and healthcare, as we all know recently, adequate housing and building infrastructure, resilient and sustainable infrastructure that can carry us forth, and effective urban mobility. However, with challenges, there are innovations. Therefore, we will see projected growth of big global geospatial marketplace from USD 59 billion today to projected USD 107.8 billion by 2026. And all this can be achieved via technologies and digitization. So without much further ado, let me introduce you to our four esteemed speakers who will answer some of our very difficult questions that we will have in mind in relation to smart cities and urban mobility. The first, Mr. Jeremy Ang, he's Investment Principal Asia Pacific for Sistema Asia Capital. Jeremy is the principal of Sistema Asia Capital, a Singapore-based growth stage technology investment fund and subsidiary of Sistema Group. They are one of the largest conglomerates in Russia. So one of the questions, please ask whether he speaks Russian. He specializes in smart city technology across Asia Pacific and brings early stage company to commercialization. Next, we have Mr. Eric Low, Vice President of Gelement, a leading 3D software company in ASEAN and brings more than 20 years of experience in the ICT industry. Eric is also an EXCO member, Vice Chair, Built Environment of Smart Cities Network, a platform that promotes the growth of smart city initiatives in the region. Our third speaker, we have Mr. John Lee, Managing Director of InfraCrowd Asia. InfraCrowd Asia is a co-developer and partner in all stages of sustainable infrastructure projects and investments in the region. He's a former partner at PwC with more than 20 years of experience in infrastructure consulting, PPP structuring, M&A, as well as government and private sector advisory roles. And lastly, we have Mr. Hong Chun Man, founder and CEO of UCars.sg. UCars, founded in 2019, has a vision to create and provide platforms and solutions that serve the automotive community, be it buyers, sellers, dealers, and service providers in Singapore. Today, UCars in Singapore is the fastest growing online car marketplace that delivers consumer-first experience. Beyond the marketplace, they have formed strategic partnerships with Top Gear and Car Buyer Singapore to provide greater content offerings to educate and delight customers with everyday driver in mind. Chun Man is also an associate faculty member at the Singapore University of Social Sciences and Singapore Polytechnic. So, Can everyone give our speakers a clap of applause? Welcome, all four of them. And I will start with the first question. The question is directed to Mr. Jeremy. So, the world has seen tremendous advancements in digitization in the last year. As a tech investor, what are some of the key trends that you're starting to witness in the geospace?
Right. Thanks, Mei. Happy to be here. So yeah, yes, indeed. Last year was a particularly good one for our tech portfolio companies. Economies had no choice but to digitize quickly, and this really puts tech platforms at the forefront for adoption, be it cybersecurity, food deliveries, and general e-commerce that we all invest in. Now, on a broader scale, we see some early signs of maturity in certain segments of the geospatial tech world. This is happening both in the data acquisition technology piece and also new use cases for geodata. So, for example, LiDARs are getting cheaper together with other sort of scanners. So this makes 3D mapping, intelligent point cloud to become more accessible. So more tech companies are starting to combine their core offerings with complementary location intelligence services. So that's really what's driving the market at the moment. And this new peripheral industry use cases are also gaining traction. So some areas that we do see disproportionate growth are things like hyperlocal mapping as a service. So companies like Nix Billion, which I believe is part of this conference, are coming up pretty quick because in emerging markets, a lot of this mapping done by Google Maps and the other big boys, they are not as accurate, not as granular for last mile delivery. So there's a lot going on for hyper local mapping, so to speak. And another area that we see some sort of maturity is fleet optimization. So telematics, plenty of companies in this segment, and it's really coming up as ride sharing, logistics, supply chains, and other large fleets are needed to really push the boundaries. And of course, content around geodata. So increasingly, we are seeing more use cases for insurance intelligence in that sphere. And we can't really touch on geospatial progress without talking about AVs, autonomous driving applications. So this is the arena where such AVs really crave richer geospatial data. So we, Sistema, we invested in a B2B AV software company based in London, and we are very hopeful that this space will continue to flourish. So this will happen in the longer horizon as we electrify our mobility networks around the world. So this is something that it's keeping us very excited. So yeah, we can definitely talk more about this later on.
Thanks, Jeremy. That was a very good insight to all things that are coming very soon. So that brings us to the next area, the next question about having all this telematics, autonomous driving, and all these are in relation to actually being in cities and being in smart cities. So smart cities bring a lot of challenges in the areas of smart buildings, especially. So, question number two for Mr. Eric, can you describe what G Element does differently from the other 3D mapping companies? And with the rising emphasis on smarter buildings and cities in general, what are some of the pain points that G Element is trying to solve? Over
Yeah,
to
yeah. Thanks, mate. Okay, I think Gelement started 20 years ago as a 3D mapping company. We met for URA SLA, the initial part of the 3D Singapore, and as an APITA Award winner, Asia Pacific ICT Award, and various IoT Smart Cities Award winner, we are constantly leading through partnership because we believe in partnership and also transformation. Over the last 10 years, we actually transformed from a 3D map to 3D application to 3D IoT platform, 3D unified platform, and now we are a 3D digital twin on cloud platform. Our fifth generation solution, known as SENFI, is able to integrate with various intelligent buildings and security sensors with our 3D dashboard on on-prem as well as on cloud. This solution also addressed the requirement and the key pain points of today's smart buildings and cities owners. For example, they all have a technical difficulty to be an integrated platform. They all wanted an integrated platform with various sensors type and data platform, and also from a different tech provider. So we are able to provide that platform to help them integrate. Another area is the need to be flexible, and owners want it to be flexible as well as customizable by any third party, as if like it's a software tool. So our fifth generation platform provide that flexibility as even as a tool. The third point is the owners also want a very cost-effective and yet scalable way of expansion. That is also possible now with our fifth generation cloud-based product. And finally, business model, which means coming to prices, how they are expecting a hybrid pricing or even a hybrid pricing like the CAPEX and OPEX as well as a subscription model. So Gelement is able to differentiate from others companies as well as to be able to solve all these pain points through all these different methods or even strategies. Yeah, thank you, Min.
Thanks, Eric. Seems like you are doing quite a lot surrounding smart cities. Yeah, congrats. Next, we would like to talk about talking about Eric and his many projects. We actually did a project with Kawayan City in the Philippines, where they were hit by typhoon 6 to 7 times a year. So in November last year, November 2020, they were hit by Typhoon Ulysses that flooded almost 60% of the areas surrounding the city and the city itself. So this has brought about questions surrounding resilient and sustainable infrastructure. There are many major infrastructure projects with increasing emphasis on sustainability. So the next question is for Mr. John. What are some of the key use cases with geospatial technology that are applicable for such projects? Sorry, John, I think you are muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah, thanks, Chokmei. Thanks for the kind introduction, and also to the organizers of SgGeoFest 2021. So I'm going to talk very briefly in terms of the applications of geospatial in sustainable infra, and I think a lot of the advancements, right, in the geospatial space has become very interesting, right? It's because of all the emerging tech, in terms of AI, in terms of machine learning, big data, visual computing, IoTs and stuff. So all these are peripheral sort of technologies that is giving the spatial data a lot of rich content, right? So that we can actually make real-time decision making. So I guess I'll just highlight some of the three areas that I've seen it used. The first area is actually in public infrastructure planning, right? So as we all know, public infrastructure involves very careful considerations, right? A lot of the social, economic, environmental impact, right? And largely because a lot of the infrastructure investments that we put in place, these are very long tenured investments, right? Very capital intensive as well. So as the in Asia Pacific, as we think about one of the mega trends, right, about cities growing big, very quickly and stuff. So one of the concerns that we have is, how do we ensure that the city planning remains safe and viable to live in, right? So in the infrastructure space, you think about, the accommodation sector, you think about even, schools, right, for education purposes, healthcare, logistics, energy, our water, wastewater plants, mobility, transportation. So these are the kind of typical infrastructure, kind of backbone, right, for any cities. Now, the geospatial data, well, we've seen it used increasingly, right, to create, more valuable real-time assessment. This has been quite useful in cases where we're trying to forecast supply and demand, right, which has always been a challenge, in the if you think about the kind of traditional ways that the authorities have undertaken, right, to decide, what kind of infrastructure is actually needed, right, to sustain the growth. So the idea here is that we need to use such information to avoid, right, building what we call white elephants, basically excessive infrastructure, which is likely going to be underused or not used. And then at the other end of the spectrum, which is, to risk not building, right, so resulting in a infrastructure investment gap, resulting in bottlenecks, right, for the development of the city or the country. So every mistake and missed opportunity, right, can cost many years, right, and a lot of money to rectify. And this is where I think the geospatial sort of services and data, right, can be a very, very useful tool, right, for authorities to plan better ahead. Now, Silk May, I think you mentioned about, it's the climate change and crisis management and stuff, right? So again, I mean, the role that public infrastructure can play in these sectors are also quite apparent, right? I mean, closer to home, right? We have experienced a lot of flash floods lately, right? So the systems that we need to put in place, right, to ensure that we can very rapidly, right, respond to any emerging threats, and then to put in place systems that will divert the water flow and stuff. It has been a very critical part, right, to make sure that the cities can still function. And then you go into things about the carbon emission, and even waste matter monitoring and sewage systems. I'm not sure whether you've heard in the news, but for example, our agency, Public Utilities Board, have been piloting programs where they can actually install sensors, right, to actually track the virus spikes in locations in sewage systems. So the idea is that it can properly sort of ring fence, right, in terms of identify kind of areas that are prone to infections, right, and then to try to deploy containment into it. And obviously the IoT systems, buildings, transportation networks also will play a part in it. And then on that note, I just want to touch a bit about the carbon emissions bit. So there is now a big push towards net zero, right, and other climate positive programs and stuff. I think the geospatial data will play a very important role, right? And partly because one of the challenge in green financing today, right, is basically the access to data, right? So there is a lot of I guess there's a lot of appetite, right, to actually grow the space of green financing, and the conversations we've had with a lot of the financial institutions is that that market space will continue to grow, right? A lot of investors are now very aware, right, about where they would like to invest, right? Banks are also very concerned that they are only lending money into businesses, right, that is not going to cause harm, right, to the environment. So the capital side of things is, is, as we always say, right, it's the lifeblood of businesses, right? So the moment you control the capital, right, you can actually influence, the way that a lot of the businesses behave. And this is where we hope that, the geospatial can actually help to provide a lot of data, right, so that the green financing, green capital can continue to grow, right? And then by that, causing a virtuous, right, spiral, where a lot of the businesses will then adapt, right, and fulfill a lot of the ESG considerations. So on the issue about the data, right, I think one of the challenge that a lot of organizations would have, it's if you sort of drill down in terms of some of the requirements, right, for green financing, right, you have to there's a lot of disclosure that you need to make and stuff. And one of the disclosure involves looking at what they call the scope 3 emissions, right? And so basically it's not just about understanding the kind of direct emissions that your businesses make, but it also involves looking at indirect emissions, like, for example, understanding all the business travel, employee commuting, waste disposal. So that there is there is going to be a lot of information data that will be required, right? The benefits for all this data for organizations are obviously manifold, right? Understanding all the emission hotspots in supply chain, identifying resource energy risk, and so it's going to be a ripple effect, right? In terms of how all this information can be used. And then lastly, thirdly, the other aspect that I've seen, the use of geospatial is that in the infrastructure construction operation phase, right? So they are now more emerging kind of software. I think Eric mentioned about the digital twin, that also applies not just on city plannings and stuff, but it can actually apply on systems, right? So you talk about transportation system, talk about MRT systems, right? You can actually build alongside with advanced software engineering and geospatial data to actually better understand, right, how these projects, how they are going to perform, over the entire, right, what we call the whole life cycle, right? Whole life cycle meaning, it's a cradle to cradle kind of cradle grave kind of a stage, right? So and hopefully, right, that means that we optimize, right, in the way that we maintain all this infrastructure, right? I mean, I think all of us who live in big cities and stuff understand the pain when your MRT systems don't work, right? So it's things like this that the geospatial kind of information can be very helpful, right? So me, I think I've taken up more than my fair share of time. So I'm just gonna pause here, right? Because I can rattle, rattle on the
Given
rest
a
of
very
the
broad
presentation.
insight.
So on that note, I think I mean, Jeremy started in saying that maybe on the tech side he thinks that that there is some kind of maturity in some sectors, but certainly from where I sit, right, I think in the sustainable infra space, right, we are at the cusp, right? I think we're seeing a lot more sort of adoption, right? But again, the adoption is not very uniform across the globe, and certainly, in terms of Southeast Asian markets and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, yesterday I was in a United Nations International Telecommunication Union event, and in that event, I think United Cities actually presented on how using digital twin as the base for all geospatial technologies. And then the rest of the other components, like you were talking about infrastructure planning, comes into it. Waste management, basically. But I think in parts of Europe, they are now very focused on net zero. So it's net zero emission. Yeah. And the other one that they are very focused in is urban mobility. So that brings us to our next question, which is very critical, especially in our Southeast Asian countries. And these are the issues that we know very well: heavy traffic, traffic jams. So the next question to Mr. Chunman: the transportation and automotive industries are one of the core users of geospatial technology. Can you tell us what types of geospatial applications are in the automotive industry?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sok Mei, for the question, and thanks to all my other fellow speakers. And I think it's great to hear about your views about what's happening in the industry. So maybe before I start to answer the question, I just give a quick introduction so that you can see how my answer. You can see my answer in the context of the automotive industry, lah. So for me, I founded UCAS. We are a venture-funded company. We're starting our Series A fundraising soon. We've recently finished our pre-Series A. Sok Mei has mentioned, so we are the fastest growing car marketplace in Singapore, and soon to be in other parts of Southeast Asia, right? So I guess what makes us qualified to sort of discuss about this particular topic is that we are not just a marketplace, right? We also publish the best content in the industry, and we actually have two automotive publications that are leaders in this space in Singapore and in the region, right? So one of that is Car Buyer, which is Singapore's only homegrown automotive magazine, online and offline. And we also publish Top Gear, right? So Top Gear, if you are a car nut like me, so you know that Top Gear is the world's most renowned automotive magazine, right? So that's obviously a BBC title, and we are the partners in publishing this title in this part of the world. So we are not really a direct user or implementer of these geospatial technologies, right? We don't make cars. We don't sell cars. I mean, we help all the brands sell their cars, but we don't exactly sell the cars ourselves. But we are observer, right? And I think through our position as a keynote in the consumer-facing ecosystem, as well as through our various content businesses, we are able to benefit greatly from the insights of experts in the car trade. So, and from whether it's in manufacturers, brands, etc., right? So what I think I want to just quickly just provide a little brief is that for the uninitiated, there are basically quite a couple of geospatial technologies, or rather technologies that rely on geospatial technologies to happen, right? And I think everyone knows about those few things, right? In the automotive industry, which is basically your LiDAR, where it helps the car see in front of it. You have got SLAM, which is algorithms to help the car figure out where it is. You've got radar, where we use radio waves to determine the distance, angle, or velocity of objects. You've got cameras also in the car, so that's a visually helping the car to kind of see what's in front of it, what's behind it, etc. Right? So the cameras, LiDAR, and radar are the eyes, but you also need the brains as well, and some kind of processor to put all these things together so that the car can actually not just see in front and see what is in front of it, but also to interpret the data and to interpret its position within the context of where it is, and to sort of make decisions around that. So I think everyone knows about the excitement around electric vehicles and around autonomous vehicles, right? And all these technologies are actually key to making all of these things happen, right? And what are the key developments in the automotive industry? Basically, you have got two things. With this, you have got autonomous driving, and number two, you have got driver assistance, right? So autonomous driving, basically, it means that you can go around in a car without a driver. And for driver assistance, it basically means that the car helps you to keep in lane, avoid colliding with other cars, warns you about other cars, blind spot, etc., right? And there's also another third area, which is not so common unless you drive a fancy car. But the third area at which some of these geospatial technologies are actually helping car makers are actually to make the rides more comfortable. So some car manufacturers like Rolls-Royce and Mercedes-Benz, they actually use high precision cameras and maps to sort of predict the road that lies in front of the car and to prepare the suspension system for the road surfaces ahead. So that helps you to balance out the ride and makes the ride more comfortable, right? I mean, after all, if you spend $2 million on a Rolls-Royce, and we had the benefit of reviewing one about 2 weeks ago. I mean, you want your ride to be supple, comfortable. You don't want to be bothered by bumps in the road, right? So these at the core of all these things, it's really geospatial technologies and some of the other stuff that I've spoken about, right? But on a more serious note, I think really the key focus for everyone in the automotive industry is really to use this technology to make cars safer, right? And I think that's really very important, not just to make cars safer, but also to make roads a safer place for everyone. You've got to think about roads as places where there are so many different users, right? You've got motorcyclists, you've got people riding bicycles, you've got people driving cars, and the technology will, if it can help, roads become safer, cars become safer, and it's going to benefit many people, right? We're also seeing some very interesting applications around this. So, if you look at in Europe, right? So Europe has a very active campaign to sort of, reduce emissions and to make things a little bit more environmentally friendly, right? So there's actually some cities in Europe that want to ban ICE cars, right? And internal combustion engine cars in some parts of the city. So what they did was they sort of look at, plug-in hybrid. So if you know what's a plug-in hybrid, it's not an electric vehicle, but basically it is a halfway mark, right? It's partly an ICE car, it's partly an electric car. With the plug-in hybrid, what some of these cities did is that they're looking at they try to geofence an area in the city, and once the car reaches inside that area, it turns off the petrol engine and the car uses electricity to go around, right? So with this, you can actually have a green zone, a quiet zone within the city. You can shut off the engine and just use electricity, right? So all these things, you need geospatial technologies to sort of make things happen. And I think I know I've exceeded my time maybe, but just one other key thing, right? I think, and this is something that I think if you look at cars, and we look at cars every day, right? We all have to change our perception of cars, right? The car is no longer the car as we think about it, right? It's not just a piece of metal on four wheels gets you from point A to point B. The car is really a gigantic iPhone on wheels, or if you are an Android user, it's a gigantic Samsung phone or Google Pixel on wheels, right? Yeah. So you think about it, right? Your mobile phone today knows where you are, and what it does is that it sends you ads. It tells you, hey, this restaurant is great, right? And or maybe it can help you to find out where your friend is, right? Or whatever or if you use Tinder, maybe find you a match or whatever, right? But I think in future, and it's not really the future, right? And I think nowadays there are already some cars with this technology. When a car goes around, your car knows where you are, and the car, or rather the software in your car, gives you recommendations on what you can do. There's a movie theater nearby, you want to watch a show, there's a nice restaurant, you can bring your date or whatever, right? So once the car knows where it is, it kind of know where you are, and it can deliver all these content-rich experiences to people that are driving these cars, right? Of course, it probably will take a little bit more time before this technology becomes ubiquitous, and I think, but I think if you look at the recent developments, I don't think it's very far away, For us as a company, what this means for us is that people are really still going to buy cars, right? Since the dawn of since the start of the first, bullock carriage, right? You have people who want their own carriage, if you can afford it, you want your own carriage. So I think people will continue to buy cars. It doesn't really matter whether it drives itself or it helps you drive it, right? The key thing, obviously, is that the car is such an essential part of everyone's life. For us as a company, because we don't make cars, we just got to see how these new business models would emerge, and we need to capitalize and evolve and adapt around it so that we continue to be very relevant to people, right? Yeah. Thank you.
That is super interesting. I never thought of it that way. It's like an iPhone on wheels.
Yeah. So that's actually, we look at all the new generation of automakers, right? You see a lot of them actually start up from a non-traditional car making view, right? They are all more, I would consider them to be more like internet entrepreneurs rather than car makers, right? And you can see there's a really big sea change in terms of thinking about what the car is and what the car can be.
Yeah. Very interesting, very interesting. To all the listeners, keep that thought. We'll come back to Chun Wan in a while. For now, yes, we'll give him a little bit of a break for now. For now, let's talk about geospatial technologies in cities. So a question is for Eric and John. What are some of the challenges that the cities are facing when implementing new geospatial technologies, despite the rising need for it? Are you seeing any progress in these areas?
Derek, why don't you
Okay,
start first?
let me go
and I'll
first.
chime in.
Okay, I think all of us know about the benefits of geospatial technology based on the previous few speakers sharing, and also the tech use and the possibility that it can help users as well as owners. But the challenge is always about who is driving the implementation, and especially how real projects can be realized. As Gelement, one of the early adopters of digital twin, which is ACA geospatial technology for real projects locally and regionally, we always felt that government, public, private, and or investor have all different perspective of the needs and the different ROI or values expectation. This implementation get more complex as more types of different stakeholders are involved. And yet it is down to sometimes only one stakeholder that is pressured to take the lead for the implementation or the adoption. So I think through partnerships and business model, probably this challenge can be overcome. and accurately identifying the changing market requirement, especially when the fear arises when this technology evolves, continue to evolve, and priority differs over time. The owner usually end up adopting a more conservative approach to solve the existing problem rather than the holistic approach by implementing a more holistic geospatial technology, which is actually scalable and future-proof. So the finally, as I just mentioned, they decided to take a more conservative approach, and therefore this kind of progress, as far as I'm concerned, is actually very slow, but actually steady, slow but steady. And we realize that once the customer decide on the real reasons and the right amount of money to solve this situation quickly, they are able to think more holistically. Okay, so I believe one potential catalyst that I will see to quicken this process is to get real funding quickly for pilots project without a need for a very detailed ROI assessment or evaluation. Okay, and with this one, with these pilot projects that can roll out very quickly, the assessment of the real reasons, the real amount of money, and the real value of the solution can be implemented so that this geospatial solution will not become obsolete or even too late to address the real problem. Yeah, this is my take. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And then I'll just chime in a bit there because I think I also echo in terms of your observations and stuff. I would sort of describe it as a mindset and lack of resources issue, right? You know, the mindset is that people tend to fall back to very traditional applications and methods that they are familiar with, right? Less so on emerging tech and stuff. And furthermore, I also see organizations where they have not started to build dedicated teams to look at this factor, right? Then you typically end up in a situation where all the brain power exists in the third-party consultants, right? And then it's ultimately left to the chief executive, to shoulder, right, the assessment and stuff. So I'm guessing that organizations that do not have proper structures to evaluate and assess, right, in terms of the needs, right, and also supported by the kind of forward thinking that's required, for organizations to project, not just the kind of problems that they see today, but the problems that is going to emerge, 5 to 10 years down the road, right? But I also think that the whole COVID-19 has helped in some instances in managing that mindset. I think now people are more open, right, to understand the kind of adverse scenarios, right, that could pan out, right. In the past, for them, it's like, they reckon the probability of that is zero, right, or near zero, and therefore, when they do ROI calculations and all the stuff, it's very hard for them to compute, right. So I think things are moving, I guess, positively on that front. But there's the other issue that I also feel sort of impedes in terms of how quickly they want to adopt. It's their concerns over cybersecurity and data sovereignty, right? I think the concern here is that as they sort of adopt more of the digitization, right? The concern is, understanding where data is stored, how is it used, how safe is it from hacking, and would the operations, right? Is it going to be affected? And certainly, in the area of sustainable infra, some of these infrastructure are quite critical, right? Think about, the power plants and water plants and stuff. If these big projects assets are disrupted, right, because of malicious, right, hacking and stuff, that's a very bad news, right. So I think whilst there is a lot of awareness in terms of the IoTs, right, being used into various systems to help them track, but I think there's also a growing awareness that they could also be vulnerable points, right, for hacking to occur and stuff. So I think it would take time, right, for people to understand the kind of solutions that are out there. I've spoken to quite a few, emerging companies, right, very promising companies that have identified these as issues, and they're now, addressing, right, the kind of concerns. Then the last thing I would also mention about, the sort of implication about, as geospatial data increases, right? The other thing is the demand for data centers will definitely have to go up, and data centers are very energy intensive, right? Sometimes water intensive as well. So they will create a lot of pressures. I mean, Singapore itself, we recently imposed a moratorium, right, on new data centers. Because and I guess rightly so, that we need to understand, what's the implication, right, of putting, a lot more data centers on a very small island. But obviously, this can also create a lot of opportunities, right, in terms of thinking about, importing more of that green energy, from across the borders, right, in order to support the growth in data centers and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, there could be a lot of, upsides that could come out of this as well. So, I think overall, the challenges are there. We're not there yet, but the momentum and acceleration in general, I mean, it is gathering, right? It's as good as been, over the last few decades.
Yeah, that's true. And then we can talk about data centers, underwater data centers, and that's coming as well.
Yeah, there's been a
Cooling
few
system.
kind of pilots. I would still call it pilots. I don't think they're
Yeah,
very common nowadays.
this is like Chunman's iPhone on wheels. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Earlier, Jeremy mentioned a bit on fleet management as well. So this question is for Chunman. How do you think new geospatial developments in autonomous driving and fleet management segments will change the mobility industry? Which segment would you hope to see more development in?
Okay, thanks, Xiao Mei, for the question. And it was, I had a good like 1 minute, 5 minute break listening to John and Eric, and I think I always enjoy listening to them, right, because they are such experts in this industry. Uh, okay, so on this note, I think, I mean, if you think about these geospatial developments, right, I think it's quite important to think that in itself, I mean, the impact, it's probably not going to be very measurable, but these geospatial developments actually power technologies and applications of technology that will change things. It's not so much about the technology, right? It's about how you apply it and whether it solves a meaningful problem for people. And essentially, I think there will be four things that will change. One, it's our relationship with cars. Two, I think it's the safety of a car and the safety on the road. I think the third point, it's efficiency. And lastly, it's about urban planning, right? The changes around urban planning as a result of this application of technology. And if you think about full self-driving cars, right? And I think if you type in full self-driving cars into Google today, you will see, I think the first thing that will pop up is Elon Musk talking about how their full self-driving, talking about Tesla's full self-driving capability. So I mean, many automakers, or rather every automaker is thinking about it, and some people are a little bit more advanced than others in terms of making headway into these things. I think today it is a thing that's upcoming, but it's not entirely a thing yet, right? But once it becomes a thing, and I think it will happen, is that it will really change our relationships with the car, right? And if you look at cars today, the way people think about cars has been the same for the last 100 years. They're kind of designed from the outside in, right? You think about where you need to put the engine, you think about where you need to put the cabin, you think about, okay, you think that you need 4 wheels, or in some cars, 3 wheels. They don't make them anymore, but there were previously cars with 3 wheels, like the BMW, etc. So you think about, so that's how automakers sort of think about these things, right? But if you think about cars that are self-driving, right, and you think about it from the inside out, right, because With self-driving cars, the car, you don't really have to operate it anymore. There's a lot of opportunity for people to use the car as a workplace, as a meeting room, or as a place where you can take a rest before you go to your next meeting, right? So with this, you sort of think about cars from the inside out. You think about what you want in the inside. Okay, I don't know, maybe you want a bed or you want on a meeting table, and then you put things around it, right? And this is not what I say, right? It is what actually our colleagues in Car Buyer magazine, they had I think it was an interview, or they had a chat with the board member in charge of development at Audi, and he basically said this to them last week, right? So there's a sea change in terms of how people think about cars, right? And I think that how it will really affect those four things I mentioned with autonomous driving, it will definitely make cars a lot safer. It will, and it's not, and the implications are are even beyond the person that's in the car, whether you get into a collision, whether you die or you get injured, right? But it's also about on the entire perspective, how will it make roads safer for everyone, right? And there are a lot of implications associated with that. It will lower insurance premiums. I think it may reduce the amount of space required for roads. It may actually change the way people think about road planning. I notice many of you here today are from urban planning disciplines. So I think it will change the way people think about how roads are meant to be constructed, make things more efficient and reliable, right?
Yeah.
And then the second point is on efficiency, right? So actually, if you think about how we drive today, things are not very efficient, right? There's a lot of inefficiency because whether or not you are driving yourself or you are relying on someone to drive, you're not fully optimized, right? You sort of you waste a little bit of time, checking your blind spot. Fully essential. Please check your blind spot, and you spend a little bit of time trying to avoid some joker on the road who doesn't drive properly. All these things contributes to inefficiency, right? But with self-driving capability, you don't need to think about that anymore. The computers in the car will think about that, and they will think about that with the other cars that are on the road. So with greater efficiency, what I think that means is that you may not need so many vehicles to actually support this population, right? You may actually reduce the number of cars that are required to support this population. And I think the last point on this really is about the implications on urban planning, right? And if you think about, just to give an example, autonomous logistics, right? Or rather, or you can call it autonomous last mile delivery, lah. Some people believe that it will change our relationship with space in the city. So now, if you think about how you want to buy stuff, right? Let's say I feel a bit hungry, right? And I want to go to a 7-Eleven. I got to go to a 7-Eleven, right? But in future, you can imagine you can have a convenience store on wheels, right? It's an autonomous driving convenience store on wheels. You just turn on your phone and then you order a Coke and your burger or whatever, and the 7-Eleven autonomous vehicle come and just grab it, right? And so instead of you having to go to the store comes to you. And I think there are tremendous implications in the way we plan our city, right? And if you think about self-driving, in the past, or rather now, like, if you stay in, property prices are very expensive near the city center, right? Because it's close to your workplace, lah. But with self-driving cars, is that 1 hour commute really such a bad thing? You can take a nap, you can do a conference call, and you don't need a driver, right? The car drives itself. So I think it would change the way we plan our city. In the past, or rather now, we put all our stores in one place. There are certain very traditional schools of thought about how we plan cities, but I think that will change. And with all these changes, it will also change things like property prices, and how people think about the relationship with cars. And also broadly speaking, I think if you think about what are some of the other potential implications and change, you got to see how and where the industries are going to change as a result of that, right? And I think there are really another 4 areas, right? One, I think, is logistics and career services. All these jobs I think will be at risk in the future. When you have full self-driving vehicles or autonomous vehicles, you might not need people who drive career vans. You may not need people who drive logistics vehicles, right? And public transport, right? Public transport, maybe one day the buses will fully drive itself. And you can see in Singapore there's some trials around this already. And this is starting to encroach, right? And the example I can give you is that in Japan, if I'm not wrong, there's a application of this technology where if the bus goes near the curb, the computer takes over, right? So you want to stop at the bus stop, the computer takes over, and then the bus driver doesn't have to do anything. So all these things are starting to encroach on what has traditionally been a very human task, and bit by bit, I think the humans become less relevant in terms of driving.
Only from driving or from other perspective as well.
Other perspectives still very relevant, but driving maybe not so relevant anymore, right? And then,
That's very concerning, Junman.
Exactly.
Humans are no longer required.
So of course, then the self-driving cars, obviously, I think that's quite apparent. And lastly, like ride-hailing, right? You don't even need, a driver for that, right? So there's going to be, I think, a lot of job restructuring that's going to be required. And I think that really is the key changes, right? And I mean, I don't think don't know how many of you have actually sat in an autonomous vehicle. I have a few years ago in China. My colleague, who's our chief content officer, he didn't believe in autonomous cars until he sat in one, and he says that wow, the car is a better driver than almost everyone he knows. So it's a thing. It's just that it's not fully ready for prime time, but it's a thing. And so on my last point, right, which is about what segments I hope to see more development in. I think I really hope to see that these technologies become commoditized, right? Because technology and safety shouldn't be just for the rich, I think we need to see that once these things become more commoditized, you can actually democratize the availability of this technology and the positive benefits that you get out of all these things, and so that whichever city you are living, whichever country you are living, any car in the world, I think should be equipped at least some driver assistance systems. And that will make things a lot safer for everyone, right? And you will save lives, you will save jobs, you will save families, right? I think there's so much good that can come out of it. So I think we are at an exciting time in the automotive industry, and really geospatial, it's really key to making all of these things happen.
Yeah. It seems like there's like a waterfall effect. When you have something that is smart, it's not just a silo on its own.
Yeah.
The effect will be across all other sectors of the cities and all that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So we have heard a lot about autonomous cars. We have heard a lot about phone on wheels, which I like. Content-rich cars, Public infrastructure planning, green financing, leadership in cities. What Eric was saying is so true. They need to be leadership in cities and somebody to just say that, let's get this done. Capacity building in cities as well. So without that, the ownership is not going to be there. Geofencing of green areas, inside out cars. So the next question is going to be a little bit more different. And the last question is actually for Jeremy. It's more of a crystal ball kind of a question. We have listened to all of these for the last about 45 minutes. So the question is, what do you think the future holds for geotech in the next few years?
Right, good question. That's something that all investors are always looking out for. So I think the next couple of years will be particularly interesting for geotech. So as I mentioned, certain segments are already showing early signs of maturity. Still a long way to go, but early signs, and certain use cases might be mainstream in the next couple of years. So, but of course, as investors, we're always pushing the boundaries. We're always looking for the newest technologies. So certain segments are a little far out there at this point of time, but we are always starting to explore and hopefully see a commercialization in the near future. So some areas, because of COVID, we have to reimagine a lot of spaces. So AR and VR, intelligent point cloud, that's something that has been coming up quite a lot. Reimagining retail and event spaces. So live streaming entire environments, either through current kind of bandwidth, or exploring 5G applications as well. So doing that, but with a more realistic geotagging of the environment. So that's something that's already in the making. We've seen a couple of companies doing that. Also, I'd like to touch on AVs a little bit. So what Chunman was talking about just now was what we call V2X, vehicle to everything, or in China, it's internet car, direct translation. So a lot of that has been happening in Europe, in China, and we do see that really maturing in the next couple of years. It will take still, I believe, 10 years, 15 years, or whatever to reach level 5 kind of autonomy where you don't have a steering wheel in a car. That's going to take a long time. But in certain scenarios, there might be level 5 very soon. And these are in controlled facilities, say, for example, intra-port transportation, intra hub sort of transportation. So for this kind of use cases, we do see applications and pilots already in the making, and we do believe that will come very, very soon. And another thing that we're quite interested in is drones. For Sistema, we have a drone company. We build long-range drones. And we're always thinking about what will happen if drone adoption will increase. Our skies are going to be littered with drones. So over the last couple of years, we've been looking at drone tracking technology. Right now, even in Singapore, there's new regulation to put transponder-like systems on drones. So I myself, I was an ex-pilot. I'm currently an enterprise drone certified pilot here in Singapore as well. So we're always looking at how we can really coordinate increase adoption of this sort of aerial vehicles in a very confined space, especially for Singapore, where we only have 5 aerodromes across 40 kilometers of land. So that's really a challenge for a lot of developing cities, and it's definitely a priority for a lot of regulators. And last but not least, because AVs are going to come in, electric vehicles are going to come in into developed nations pretty soon and on a larger scale. Take China, for example, one of the largest EV markets in the world, if not the largest. A lot of people have been talking about the cars, but there has to be more emphasis on the smart energy grids in these cities, because a lot of, for example, Singapore, we are expecting 70,000 charging stations in the next 10 years. But a lot of open air car parks that we see, we just don't have the power there. Right. Yeah. So we see that the sort of infrastructure coming up, a lot of CPO, charging point operators, will start to think of new solutions. And a lot of these systems will require geotag, whether it's geotagging, recommending drivers to the most optimal charging sites to really balance out the charging capacity, the peak periods, across the entire day. So that's something that's very important for the grid, especially when it's a very congested city, right? Like most mega cities. So like what Siok Mei rightly pointed out, in the next 20 years, 1/3 of Asia will live in cities, right? So it's going to be a massive shift of population to urbanized areas around the world. And I don't think we can ignore such a massive migration of people. We're seeing this in the emerging markets especially. So definitely we need to look at leaner kind of applications for emerging markets, not just developed markets. And this is where I think a lot of geotech will come in play for city planning and so on and so forth. So I think the fellow speakers have spoke a lot today. I think I could go on, but maybe let's open up the time for some Q&A, right, Siok Mei?
Yes. We can open up the floor now for any questions. I think we have a couple of minutes left. We're going to run over a little bit. So very interesting conversation. So Chunman now not only needs to look at cars on the road, he can look at flying cars. Yeah. drones that can basically carry us around. Yes, that is very interesting.
Yep.
If no questions, I think we are at 2:59. So we would like to thank everyone for spending the afternoon with us. We hope that we have given you many, many takeaways, many dreams and ideas and insights from our panels. Uh, Please feel free to reach out to any one of us or to our GeoWorks partner to get in contact and talk to us more. We are very happy to talk, yes, all of us.
Thank you, Sok Mei.
I pass this off back to Zulera.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Sukmi. So, thank you everyone for tuning into the webinar. Before you go, please check out our other events by scanning the QR code and join in the conversation using the hashtag SgGeoFest. So, thank you, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right, thanks
Thank
everyone.
you, guys.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you.